I once thought my life would end quietly on a cold mountain in Colorado, until the day a landslide buried my cabin and almost buried me with it. The people who saved me were not rescue workers. They were widows, women the whole town laughed at and treated like burdens. When the oldest widow looked at me with a hard, tired face and said, "Buy all the girls," everyone thought I would choose the youngest and prettiest one. But I looked around the yard past all the judging eyes, then pointed at the overweight foreign girl, standing with her head lowered in the corner. "I choose her," I said, and the whole town went silent. The cold wind of late autumn sliced through Silver Creek, Colorado, like a dull blade. I, Elias Crowe, 48 years old, had come down from the mountain that morning only because my supplies were running low. Salt, flour, rope, nothing more. 15 years of living alone in a hand-built cabin on the ridge had taught me to need very little and speak to even less. My wife Sarah and our daughter Emma had died in a fever that swept the valley when I was 33, and after the burial, I walked up the mountain and never really came back down. The town had become a place I visited only when necessary, like a man stepping into a memory he no longer wanted. But that morning, the square was packed tighter than I had ever seen it. People stood shoulder to shoulder in front of the old wooden platform the town council used for auctions and town meetings. 5 women and girls stood in a line on that platform, their faces pale, their shoulders hunched against the wind and the stairs. They were not criminals. They were simply people who could not pay what they owed after a brutal winter. Rent, doctor bills, funeral costs, wages their employers had refused to honor. According to the old county law, still on the books from the mining days, unpaid debts could be settled by selling a labor contract. Someone would pay the debt, and in return the debtor would work for a fixed time. On paper, it was a contract. In practice, everyone knew it was a public humiliation dressed up as justice. I meant to walk past. I hated crowds. I hated the way money turned people into things to be bargained over. But then I heard the laughter. It came from a cluster of men near the front. They were pointing at the last girl in the line. She looked about 27 or 28. Round face, full figure, black hair tied low at the nape of her neck. Her dress was old but neatly mended, the kind of careful patching that spoke of pride even in poverty. She kept her eyes on the wooden planks beneath her feet. Her hands were clenched so tightly in the fabric of her skirt that the knuckles had gone white. The auctioneer read from his ledger in a loud, bored voice. "Hannah Park, daughter of the late laundryman Park Day Sung. Debt for back rent, medicine, and burial costs. Total $86. More laughter rippled through the crowd. "Fat as a sow and still eating up the money before she can pay it back," one man called out. "Buy her and you'll be feeding 2 all winter," another added. Hannah did not flinch. She did not cry. She simply stood there, small and silent in the middle of their cruelty, as if she had already accepted that this was the shape her life had taken. I felt something twist hard in my chest, something I had not felt in 15 years. Before I could think better of it, a woman's voice cut across the square, loud and sharp. Naomi Bell stepped forward. She was 50, broad-shouldered, with a face hardened by years of widowhood and hard work. Everyone called her and the 2 other widows who lived with her the 3 fat widows behind their backs. They kept to themselves on the edge of town, raised chickens, grew vegetables, and refused to remarry or beg for help. Naomi looked at the men still jeering and laughed once, cold and bitter. "If you people see women as nothing but goods to be bought and sold," she called out, "then go ahead. Buy every last one of them. Buy them all and let's see what your conscience is really worth." As the square fell quiet for a heartbeat, then a few men laughed nervously. One rancher shouted back, "If you feel so sorry for them, Naomi, why don't you buy them yourself?" "I would if I had the money," she answered. The auctioneer cleared his throat and continued. Hannah's price dropped quickly. $10, no bids, $5. Still nothing. A drunk man near the front laughed and said, "Even if you gave her to me for free, I'd have to think about it." Hannah lifted her eyes then, just for a second. There was no anger in them, only a quiet, exhausted shame so deep it made my stomach turn. I stepped out from under the awning where I had been standing. "How much to clear her debt completely?" I asked. Every head turned. The auctioneer squinted at me. "Elias Crowe? That's right, how much?" $93 with court fees. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out the small leather pouch that held what little gold I still carried from my father's old claim. I counted it out on the table in front of the auctioneer while The entire square watched in stunned silence. Naomi Bell stared at me hard, as if trying to decide whether I was a fool or something worse. The men who had been laughing moments ago now looked uncomfortable. Hannah kept her gaze on the ground, shoulders tight, waiting for whatever new humiliation was coming. The auctioneer stamped the paper and held it out to me. "You're taking Hannah Park?" I looked straight at her. She still would not meet my eyes. I said the words clearly so the whole square could hear. "I choose the foreign girl." A murmur rippled outward, then exploded into voices. "He's lost his mind," someone said loudly. "There were younger, prettier ones right there." I turned toward the voice. "I didn't come here to buy something to look at." The laughter died fast. I took the contract, folded it once, and tore it straight down the middle in front of everyone. The sound of ripping paper seemed louder than it should have been. Hannah finally looked up. Her eyes were wide, confused, almost frightened. I handed her the two halves. "You're free," I said quietly. "No debt, no contract, no owing anyone anything." She stared at the torn paper in her hands as if it might burn her. The square had gone completely silent. I turned to leave. Hannah stood motionless on the platform for another second, then stepped down and followed me through the parting crowd. Her footsteps were soft behind mine. I could feel every pair of eyes on us. When we reached the edge of the square, Naomi Bell caught up to us. She looked at me for a long moment, then at Hannah. "You just did something either very kind or very stupid, Elias Crowe," she said. "I haven't decided which yet." I shrugged. "Maybe both." Hannah's voice came out small and careful, her English still carrying the soft accent of her parents. "What do you want me to do for you?" I stopped walking and looked at her. "Nothing," I said. "First thing is, you eat a hot meal. After that, you decide." She blinked, as if the words made no sense to her. I started walking again toward Mabel's little cafe on the corner. Hannah followed, still clutching the torn contract like it was something fragile and dangerous at the same time. Behind us, the square slowly woke up again with whispers and murmurs. I didn't care. For the first time in 15 years, I had done something that pulled me back into the world of the living, whether I wanted to be there or not. And the girl walking silently behind me, the one the whole town had decided was worth almost nothing, had just become the reason I could no longer hide on my mountain. The square slowly emptied behind us as Hannah and I walked toward Mabel Foster's cafe on the corner of Main Street. The wind had picked up, carrying the sharp smell of coming snow. Hannah kept half a step behind me, her eyes fixed on the frozen mud beneath her boots. She still clutched the two torn halves of the contract like they might fly away if she loosened her grip. I pushed open the door to Mabel's. The little bell above it jingled, warm air thick with the smell of coffee and fresh cornbread washed over us. A few locals looked up from their tables. Conversations died mid-sentence. I could feel the stares crawling over both of us. "2 bowls of beef stew, Mabel," I said, keeping my voice even. "And coffee." Mabel, a stout woman in her 60s who had known me since I was a boy, raised one eyebrow but said nothing. She simply nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. I chose a table near the back wall, away from the windows. Hannah sat down slowly, as if the chair might break under her weight. She folded her hands in her lap and stared at the scarred wooden tabletop. I waited until Mabel set the steaming bowls in front of us before I spoke. "Eat," I said quietly. "It's hot. You look like you haven't had a proper meal in days." She picked up the spoon but didn't lift it. Her voice was soft, careful, carrying that gentle accent that marked her as someone who had learned English later in life. "Why did you tear the paper?" I took a slow sip of coffee, letting the heat burn my tongue. "Because I didn't buy you. I paid the debt so the town couldn't use it to shame you anymore. There's a difference." And her dark eyes finally met mine for the first time since we left the square. There was confusion in them, and something sharper. Distrust. "In this country, no one pays $93 for nothing," she said. "People will still talk. They will say you bought the fat foreign girl because no one else wanted her." I set my cup down. Let them talk. I stopped caring what this town says a long time ago. She looked down at her bowl again. Steam rose between us. "I still want to work," she said after a long silence. "I don't want to owe anyone. Not even you." I nodded. "Fair enough, but not like a servant. Not like someone who was sold. You work because you choose to, and when the debt feels paid in your own heart, you're free to go wherever you want. She ate then, small, cautious spoonfuls, as if she were afraid the food might be taken away at any moment. I ate too, but mostly I watched her. She was stronger than the crowd had given her credit for. You could see it in the straight line of her back even when she was trying to make herself smaller. After the meal, I walked her to the edge of town, to the weathered white house where Naomi Bell lived with Clara Morrison and Beatrice Hale, the three widows everyone whispered about. The house sat on a quiet patch of land with a big garden and a chicken coop. Smoke curled from the chimney. Naomi was waiting on the porch, arms crossed, as if she had known we were coming. Clara and Beatrice stood behind her like quiet soldiers. She has nowhere to go, I told them. Naomi looked at Hannah for a long moment, then at me. She can stay here, Naomi said. We've got room. And we know what it feels like when the whole town decides you're worth less than the dirt under their boots. Hannah's shoulders stiffened. I don't want charity, she said. Beatrice smiled gently, the kind of smile that had probably comforted more broken hearts than I could count. No one here is offering charity, child. We're offering a bed, hot food, and honest work. The rest you earn yourself. But Hannah hesitated, then gave a small nod. She turned to me one last time. Thank you, Mr. Crowe, for the meal. And for today. I tipped my hat. Elias is fine, and you don't owe me thanks. Just take care of yourself. I watched her walk up the porch steps and disappear inside with the three widows. The door closed softly behind them. On the long walk back up the mountain that afternoon, the wind felt colder than usual. For 15 years, I had lived with silence so complete it had become a kind of friend. I talked to the trees, to the creek, to the grave markers behind my cabin more than I talked to living people. I told myself it was easier that way. No one to lose, no one to disappoint. But today, I had stepped back into the world for the first time since I buried Sarah and Emma. I had torn up a contract in front of the entire town. I had chosen a girl everyone else had thrown away. And now that girl, Hannah Park, with her quiet dignity and her careful mended dress, was sleeping under someone else's roof while I climbed back to my empty cabin. I built a fire when I got home and sat staring into the flames for a long time. The wind howled around the logs. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. For the first time in 15 years, the silence inside the cabin felt heavier than the silence outside. I didn't know it yet, but the mountain I had hidden on for so long had already begun to let me go. The gossip started before the sun had even cleared the mountains the next morning. I heard it first at the livery stable when I went to buy feed for my horse. Two men loading sacks of grain stopped talking the moment I walked in. One of them, Frank Barton, who ran the general store, gave me a sideways look and muttered loud enough for me to hear, Crowe went and bought himself the fat Korean girl. Guess even a hermit gets lonely. I didn't answer. I paid for the grain, loaded it onto the pack saddle, and rode out of town. But the words followed me up the trail like crows. By the time I reached the widow's house that afternoon to drop off more supplies, the whole town had turned the story into something uglier. They said I had bought the foreign girl because no white woman would have me. They said Hannah must have bewitched me. They said the three widows were running a home for strays and failures. I found Hannah behind the house, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing laundry in a big iron tub. Her arms were red from the cold water. When she saw me, she straightened quickly and wiped her hands on her apron. Mr. Crowe, she said, formal as ever, I have been thinking I want to work off the money, not as charity, not as a favor. I will clean, cook, mend, whatever you need at your cabin. I will walk up every day if I have to. I set the sack of flour down on the porch step. You don't owe me anything, Hannah. Her jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw real anger flicker behind her careful eyes. You paid $93 in front of everyone, she said. In this country, that means something. People look at me now and they see a girl who was bought. Even if you tore the paper, the feeling is still there. I need to work it off, for myself, not for you. I studied her face. The wind had reddened her cheeks. A strand of black hair had come loose and stuck to her forehead. She looked tired, but she also looked determined in a way that made me remember why I had stepped forward in the square. All right, I said, but not at my cabin. The trail is too rough in winter. You work here with Naomi, Clara, and Beatrice. Help them with the garden. the chickens, the sewing. When spring comes, if you still want to, we'll talk again. She nodded once, short and firm, as if sealing a contract with herself. That was how the days settled into a new rhythm. I went back up the mountain most days, but I came down more often than I had in years. I brought meat, firewood, tools. Hannah worked from sunrise until the light faded. She never complained. She scrubbed floors, hauled water, mended clothes, and learned Beatrice's recipes with quiet focus. The three widows treated her like family. No pity, no questions, just steady work and hot meals. But the town kept talking. And then the railroad arrived. His name was James Whitfield. He rode into Silver Creek on a fine bay horse wearing a city coat and polished boots. He worked for the Colorado Mountain Railway Company. They wanted to lay tracks straight through the high valley, right over the ridge where my cabin stood. He found me at the widow's house one cold afternoon. I was splitting kindling in the yard. Hannah was hanging laundry nearby. Whitfield tipped his hat politely, but his eyes were cold. "Mr. Crowe," he said, "we've been trying to reach you for months. The company has acquired rights to the land along the proposed route. Your father's old claim sits directly in the path. We're prepared to offer fair compensation." I drove the axe into the chopping block and left it there. "That land has been in my family since 1843, I said. "My father's name is on the original grant. It's not for sale." Whitfield smiled the way men smile when they already know they hold the better cards. "According to county records, the deed was never properly filed after your father's death. Without current documentation, the land reverts to the public domain. The railroad has already purchased mineral and right-of-way claims for the entire ridge. You have 48 hours to remove any personal property." He handed me a folded paper, touched his hat again, and rode away. I stood there with the document in my hand, the winter wind cutting through my coat. The cabin wasn't just wood and stone. It was the last place Sarah had laughed, the last place Emma had run through the grass. It was the only home I had left. Naomi stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Clara and Beatrice followed. Hannah came around the corner, laundry basket still in her arms. Clara read the paper carefully, her mouth tightening. "They're lying," she said. "But lies with money and lawyers behind them are hard to fight." Naomi looked at me. "You got that old deed your father kept in the Bible?" "It's up at the cabin," I said. "Buried under the floorboards where the stove used to be." Beatrice shook her head. "Trail's dangerous this time of year. Snow's coming." Hannah set the laundry basket down. "I will go," she said. We all turned to look at her. She lifted her chin, the same quiet defiance I had seen on the auction platform. "When they put me on that stage, everyone said it was my problem. Mr. Crowe stepped forward anyway. Now they want to take his land, so we step forward." I started to argue, but Naomi cut me off. "She's right. We all go, together." The next morning, before dawn, the five of us left the widow's house. Naomi, Clara, Beatrice, Hannah, and me. The trail up the mountain was steep and icy. Hannah struggled. Her heavier build and city shoes made every step harder, but she never asked to turn back. When she slipped on a loose rock and nearly fell, I reached out to steady her. She took my arm for only a second, then let go. "I can walk," she said quietly. "I know you can," I answered. We reached the ruined cabin by midday. Snow had already dusted the collapsed roof and broken windows. We dug through the wreckage together, lifting charred timbers, shifting fallen stones, searching for the small metal box my father had hidden beneath the floorboards near the old stove. It was Hannah who found it. She was on her knees in the dirt, fingers scraped raw when she called my name. "Elias." She held up the small tin box, dented but intact. Inside was my father's old Bible, its leather cover cracked and water-stained. Between the pages, folded carefully, was the original land grant paper, yellowed but still legible, bearing the territorial seal and my father's name. Clara examined it in the weak sunlight. "This is legal," she said. "Dated 1843, signed by the territorial governor himself." Naomi looked at Hannah with something close to respect. "You just saved this man's home," she told her. Hannah brushed dirt from her hands and stood up slowly. For the first time since I had met her, she looked almost proud. "I didn't save it," she said. "We did." As we started back down the mountain with the paper safely tucked inside my coat, The wind picked up and snow began to fall in earnest. I walked beside Hannah. She was breathing hard, exhausted, but her steps were steady now. I realized something in that moment. I had gone to the square that day thinking I was choosing her. But maybe, just maybe, she was the one who had chosen me first. The real fight was only beginning. The second auction came faster than anyone expected. 2 weeks after we brought the old land grant down from the mountain, the town crier rang the bell again on the square. Snow had fallen heavy the night before, but the platform was cleared and the same wooden stage stood waiting. This time, 4 young women and 2 older widows were lined up. Their debts were smaller, but the shame was the same. The railroad company had made sure the whole town knew Elias Crowe was fighting them, and the gossip had turned meaner. People said I was stirring trouble, that the widows were filling their house with strays, that Hannah Park had brought bad luck with her foreign blood. I stood at the back with Naomi, Clara, Beatrice, and Hannah. We had spent every spare cent we could scrape together. Naomi emptied her winter savings. Clara sold 2 of her late husband's watches. Beatrice contributed the silver brooch she had worn at her wedding. Hannah brought out a small wooden box and placed her mother's jade hairpin and her father's plain silver ring on the table without a word. No one tried to stop her this time. When the bidding started, the usual men stepped forward, laughing, joking, treating it like sport. The first girl went for $12, the second for $8. The crowd was in a good mood, until Naomi Bell stepped out in front of the platform, her voice carrying across the square like a whip. Hey mua het kako gaidi. This time, no one laughed. She said it again, louder, in English so the whole town could hear. If you see us as goods to be bought and sold, then buy every last one of them. Buy them all! The auctioneer froze. The men who had been bidding shifted uncomfortably. I walked forward and placed our pooled money on the table in a single heavy clink of coins and small gold pieces. I'll take all of them, I said. Every debt. Every contract. A stunned silence fell over the square. The auctioneer's voice cracked when he finally spoke. All of them? That's $147. I counted it out, coin by coin, until the exact amount lay on the table. Then, one by one, we took the contracts. Hannah stood beside me, her hands steady now. When the last paper was handed over, she looked straight at the crowd and spoke in a clear, quiet voice that somehow reached every ear. You brought us here to shame us, she said. You stood there and laughed while we stood on this platform like cattle. Today we bought ourselves back. Not because we belong to anyone, but because we refuse to let you decide our worth. She took the first contract, tore it slowly down the middle, and let the pieces fall into the snow. I tore the next. Naomi, Clara, and Beatrice tore the rest. 6 torn contracts lay scattered on the ground like broken chains. A woman in the crowd began to cry. Another stepped forward and pressed a small bundle of clothes into Hannah's hands. No one cheered. The silence was heavier than any cheer could have been. But the real fire came 3 days later, inside the county courthouse. James Whitfield's lawyers had filed to seize my land. They brought a slick city attorney who wore a fine wool coat and spoke with the confidence of money. He stood up in court and tried to make us look ridiculous. Mr. Crowe, the lawyer said, smirking, is it true you recently purchased a Korean woman at a public auction? And now you live with 3 widows and this same woman? Quite the household for a man who claims to value his family legacy. The courtroom murmured. I felt Hannah tense beside me on the wooden bench. Before my own lawyer could answer, Hannah stood up. The judge looked surprised. Miss Park, you are not required to speak. I want to, she said. She walked to the front, small and round in her plain mended dress, and faced the railroad lawyer directly. Yes, she said, her voice steady. Mr. Crowe paid my debt on that platform. Then he tore the contract in half in front of everyone. He did not buy me. He freed me, and if that makes him a fool in your eyes, then I am proud to be the reason for his foolishness. She turned to the judge. These men want Mr. Crowe's land because it is in their way. They do not care that his father earned it, that his wife and daughter are buried on it, that it is the only home he has left. They smile and call it business. But I have seen what they call business. I have stood on a stage while men laughed at my body and my accent and my poverty. I will not stay quiet while they do the same thing to a man's home. The courtroom was completely still. The railroad lawyer tried to interrupt. The judge silenced him with one sharp look. Hannah finished softly. A piece of paper does not make a man rich, and a piece of paper does not make a woman worthless. We have both learned that the hard way. She sat down. I could not speak. My throat had closed tight. When the judge ruled in our favor on the first motion, recognizing my father's grant as valid, the railroad attorney's face went white. It was only the first battle, but it was a victory no one in Silver Creek had expected. Outside the courthouse, snow was falling again. Hannah walked beside me. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, very quietly, I was so afraid that day on the platform. I thought no one would ever choose me for anything good. I stopped walking. The snow settled on her dark hair like tiny white stars. I didn't choose you because you needed saving, Hannah, I told her. I chose you because when I looked at you, I saw someone who still had the courage to stand straight even when the whole world was trying to bend her. She looked up at me. Her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. A small, real smile that reached all the way to the tiredness in her face. And I choose to stay, she said. Not because I owe you, but because for the first time since my father died, I am not afraid to belong somewhere. Behind us, Naomi, Clara, and Beatrice waited near the steps. They didn't say anything. They didn't have to. The five of us had already become something the town could not name and could not break. The fight with the railroad was far from over. But on that cold afternoon, walking away from the courthouse with torn contracts and a fresh court order in our hands, I understood something I had not known when I first stepped out of the shadows of that auction platform. I had not saved Hannah Park. She, and the three widows who opened their door without question, had begun to save me from the long silence I had chosen for myself. And the town of Silver Creek was only just beginning to feel the change. 1 year later, the snow had melted early. Spring came soft and green to the ridge above Silver Creek, and the cabin I once called home was no longer a lonely shelter against the wind. We had rebuilt it together, larger, steadier, with wide windows that caught the morning light and a long wooden porch that looked down over the valley. The three widows had moved up the mountain with us. Naomi still ran the garden with iron hands. Clara kept the accounts and argued with lawyers when the railroad tried one last time to push us off the land. Beatrice cooked for whoever showed up at our door and taught Hannah how to make bread that rose perfectly even on the coldest mornings. And Hannah had changed the most. She no longer walked with her shoulders pulled inward, trying to take up less space in the world. She moved through the house with quiet confidence, her mended dresses now brightened with small embroidered flowers she had sewn herself. The women who came to us, girls running from debt, widows with no place left, immigrants who spoke little English, all found their way to the wide table in the kitchen where Hannah taught them to sew. She never raised her voice. She simply placed the needle in their hands and said the same thing every time. Try again? The cloth does not mind mistakes. It only remembers the hands that keep trying. I watched her from the doorway one warm afternoon, the way I often did. A young Mexican girl was crying over a crooked seam. Hannah sat beside her, patient, guiding her fingers without pity. You are not broken, Hannah told her softly. You are only learning. That is different. The girl wiped her eyes and tried again. The seam came out straighter this time. Hannah smiled. Small, real, the kind of smile that reached her eyes now without hesitating. Later that evening, after the last visitor had gone home and the house had grown quiet, we sat on the long porch together. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. Naomi was rocking in her chair, knitting. Clara read a letter by lamplight. Beatrice hummed an old hymn while shelling peas. Hannah sat beside me on the wooden bench, mending the sleeve of my old coat, the same coat I had worn the day I stepped out of the shadows in the square. I looked at her hands, steady and sure on the needle. You know, I said quietly, a year ago I thought I was choosing you. Standing in that square, tearing that paper. I believed I was the one doing the saving. Bah soy. Hannah didn't look up right away. She finished the last stitch, tied the thread, and bit it off neatly with her teeth the way Beatrice had taught her. Only then did she turn to me. And now? She asked. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. Her fingers were warm from the work, a little rough from the years of laundry and sewing and hardship, but They fit perfectly against mine. Now I understand I didn't save you, I said. You and these three stubborn women, you pulled me down off that mountain. You reminded me that a man can live alone for 15 years and still be lonely in a way that no mountain can fix. Naomi snorted softly from her rocking chair but didn't interrupt. Hannah leaned her head against my shoulder. The gesture was simple, natural, the kind of closeness that had grown slowly between us like the wildflowers pushing through the snow each spring. I was so ashamed that day, she whispered, standing there while they laughed. I thought the world had decided my worth and I had no right to argue with it. Then you spoke. Not loud, not angry. You simply chose me when no one else would. And you asked for nothing in return. She paused, watching the last light fade behind the peaks. I stayed because I wanted to learn how to choose myself, the same way you chose me. Not because I owed you, not because I was afraid, but because here, I am not the fat foreign girl. I am Hannah,